Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm Jade Scott. This is GrowthRx, and today we are joined by the amazing Luke Nelson. How are you, Luke? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Thanks very much for having me, Jade. It's a long time listener and first time caller, so it's been great to be on one of these Thursday chats.
Thank you. Oh, look, I've been watching your journey for like a decade, and I've had the privilege to know you both professionally and personally. So it's really nice to have you joining me here today and talking to you about your passion. I think you've got one of the biggest smiles in allied health. And so it's good to be able to showcase that as well. And obviously the amazing things that you are doing, not only in chiropractic, but in, across the whole allied health sector. So look, we've only got about an hour. So I've had to cut down your CV a little bit. To intro you, I guess, across many other things, you are a chiropractor, you are a business owner, health and high performance, but you did step across into that sports chiropractic space. It was probably, over 10 years ago now. I think I've been watching your journey, and I think you're very humble in your approach with this, that you did start amongst many others, but I think you did forge the way for a lot of sports chiro out there, and there are certainly a lot of people that hold you in high regard in that space. You are president of Sports Chiro Australia, and you're also the vice president of Sports Medicine Australia Victoria. So you've got your finger in a lot of pies, Luke.
Yes. I do tend to keep myself busy. I'm very fortunate for all the opportunities that I've had all on the years, and mentoring that I've had along the way to bring me up, I guess, into these roles and make sure that I've been ready or somewhat ready to take them on. So I'm very thankful for those that have come before me that have helped me take step up.
Yeah. So obviously we want to get to know you a little bit better. I call you the running chiro. That's how you're fondly known to me and many others. And that's what you're going to be talking to us today about, your specialty and your expertise and your research and study over the years in this space. I think there are not many others better equipped to deal with what you're going to talk to today. So I'm really excited to hear what you put together for us. But I guess on a more personal note, I'm going to hit you with 3 hard-hitting questions.
Go for it.
Get to know you. So let's start off with this running love of yours and passion. I also know that you've got a bit of a sweet tooth. Yeah. So would you rather never have chocolate again or never run again?
Never have chocolate again. Well, I reckon I would go with never have chocolate again because there's lots of other sweet things other than chocolate. Even though chocolate's pretty bloody good, I'd still be able to. Donuts. You could still have donuts. You could, lollies. There's lots of things that you have, but I do love chocolate. You're right. But running is above chocolate.
Okay. And your favourite food? If you're going to order takeaway tonight, what would you be ordering on the menu?
I gotta say Thai, actually. Yeah, Thai. A good love a good noodle dish. Bit of noodle, bit of veg in there, bit of spice. So something a bit hot. Yeah, I'll go with Thai.
Okay. And you have obviously followed my love-hate relationship with Crocs for many years.
Yes.
This is not a question, but hopefully a request. I would like you to go for a run in Crocs and check the biomechanics for me, at least on a treadmill. Can you do that, and can you report back to the GrowthRx community about how good or not good Crocs are to running?
Well, you'd be happy to hear, but I actually don't own a pair of Crocs, so that would have to happen. I would actually have to go and buy a pair. That might be hard enough to do. But if anyone out there wants to lend me a pair, I'm a size 10 and a half. But I remember, I think it was you that posted that the image a few months ago of that young guy running an incredible time in a half marathon in a pair of Crocs. And as I said to you at the time, I said, if that made me run fast, I'd wear them. So I'll give it a go and report back to you.
I think he was under 8. He was 18 and he ran it in under 3 hours in a pair of Crocs. So
he did. Yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember whether it was the marathon or the half marathon, but he did it in a very, very respectable time. Anything to help, even if it makes me look silly, I'd go for it. And probably have would you go the sock Croc combo, or you'd have to go?
Let's not go too far. But look, if it stops the
Okay.
blisters, like if it's functional, I'll pay it. Okay.
That's right.
Apparently, as Luke Kay says, it's like running on clouds. So I mean,
I know. Yes.
we'll see. You can report back in for
Oh,
everybody.
well, that's
Okay?
right. I've got
Watch
a lot of.
this space. Watch
Yeah,
this space.
that's it exactly.
And so, obviously, on a more serious note, GrowthRx is all about showcasing great leadership in their fields, in their spaces, and passions. Yours is running, but I think before we kind of go into that, I would love to know what leadership means to you if you were trying to define it.
Yeah, and it's been, it's interesting, and I guess being, since you've begun this venture and gathering all these leaders and people from different professions, which I think is fantastic, and hearing what they've had to say, I guess I've really asked myself that question before, and what is leadership to me, and what I guess are my leadership qualities, and what are my strengths and perhaps weaknesses. Leadership to me, I mean, personally, I like to lead by example. So I think that it's rather than telling people what to do, I think going forth and as the old saying, action speaks louder than words. Not that I think that's the only type of leader, but that's I guess what leadership means to me. And I guess having the respect, not always necessarily liked, but having the respect of your colleagues and those that you are leading as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's sort of probably two values that I like to abide by, and what I feel I guess my strengths in leadership. So that's what
you are doing that. You're setting the standards for yourself that are certainly admired by others, and you've put a lot of work, and as many do, put a lot of work into these slides and these webinars, and all of the people that we have here have such busy lives and so many other things that they contribute to. So we're really grateful. So I'm going to hand over to you now to share your screen and have everybody else sit back and join you for the next half an hour or so while you present managing the injured runner.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for having me. And yes, we are going to talk about one of my passions, and that is the runner and managing the injured runner. So what we're going to talk about today is mainly history taking and communication, and then we're also going to touch on a bit of strength as well. I'll throw in a little bit of a cheeky couple of slides at the end there on strength. But what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about some of the important questions to ask during your history when you're dealing with runners. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about running load and how to perform a workload analysis, because this is something that's really important when you're dealing with runners and discussing what they're doing and their training. We talk about the 3 words that runners hate to hear, and that's just stop running. The most important for muscle group, well, as I said, I'm going to sneak that at the end there, and then also we're going to talk about just managing expectations and communication, and how to lead the most dedicated athletes and manage those who live to run. And again, that comes back to that managing expectations and communication. So this is a quote from a good friend and mentor of mine, Pete Garbett. He was one of my predecessors at Sports Chiro Australia. He has taught me a lot about leadership over the years. Got me involved further involved in Sports Chiro Australia, and also with Sports Medicine Australia. So got Pete to thank a lot for his contributions. But this is one of his quotes, and I quite like this one: that running is born out of our inner need to move and breathe and experience all that we are capable of. It is the true expression of life in motion. So running is one of the most popular recreational activities, and one of the reasons is that it's so easy to do, and also that it forms the major component of a lot of sports. So a lot of field-based sports, things like footy and soccer, and then also even your court-based sports as well. So it's easy to do, chuck on your runners and get out there, but it's also easy to do wrong. And one of the things that we see in running is that there is a high rate of injuries, and the research shows us that there's anywhere from 19 to 92% injury rate in running, but the generally accepted figure is 50%, and that 25% of runners will be injured at any one time, which is very high. And in fact, most people are surprised to hear that injury rate is higher than a lot of contact sports. So And then also the other thing too is that once they've sustained an injury, they're 50% more likely to be re-injured at a later stage. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that there's a lot of impact forces involved in running, and that each time our foot hits the ground, it absorbs 2.5 times our body weight. So if you're a 70-kilo person, each time you're landing, your body is absorbing 175 kilos with each step. And for the average jogger taking 1,000 steps per K, if you're doing 10K run, that's 10,000 steps. So that's a lot of force that our body has to redistribute. There's injuries, running injuries, like any injury really, are multifactorial. So you've got different contributions here. You've got things like genetics, you've got structure, you've got mechanics, you've got training loads, you've got tissue qualities, and you've got psychosocial contributions there as well. So whenever you're dealing with a injury or a running injury, you've always got to sort of think of all these contributions and figure out which parts of which are contributing to the person that's sitting in front of you. Most of the vast majority of injuries that you'll see in runners are overload injuries, and I like the term, and this is something that Pete also talks about as well, is that overload injuries rather than overuse. I think in terms of terminology, using the word overuse can sometimes the runner can make them feel like that a certain particular body part is being used more than another, whereas I like to sort of say overload, and that means that then when we're explaining the injury and what's going on, we talk about load redistribution. So rather than say overuse, I like to say overload. But most of them are overload injuries, so they're progressively happening over a period of time. You do get the occasional acute injury, so things like maybe they've rolled their ankle, or you can get an acute calf strain. Is probably the two more popular ones. For your sprinters and your faster runners, that's where you sometimes see hamstring strains as well. But the vast majority of those overload injuries are around the knee. So upwards of 50% of injuries are to the knee, and then you get a bit of a smattering around through the rest of the lower limb there as well, coming up into the hip and the back. But mainly the knee is what you'll see. What we'll also see is that the types of running injuries, so if we're looking at diagnosis, again, the most common type of injury that we'll see, close to 50% of injuries is patellofemoral pain. So when you're seeing a lot of recreational runners, that is probably one of the most common injuries that you'll see. And then some of the other ones as well, again, going through that lower limb, you've got your medial tibial stress syndrome, you've got your plantar heel pain or plantar fasciitis, whatever you want to call it, ITB, tibial stress fractures, and Achilles tendinopathy. So they're sort of some of the main ones. There's other less common ones as well too, but when you're dealing with runners, it's usually one of these 6 that you're going to be looking at. Now, again, what causes a running injury? So we mentioned before about this, those distributions there, or the contributions, I should say. This is a nice analogy that I like to use with my runners and patients is what has contributed to their injury or what's contributing to their pain. And I like to use this the scales analogy of you've got stress and then you've got capacity here. So we've got things that are putting rocks on the stress side. So we've got like your workload, which is training, and that might include your training volume, your intensity, how often you're running, and then you've got your recovery on that side as well too. So how's your sleep, how you're recovering, how's your nutrition. And then also psychosocial stress as well, which at the moment with everything that's happening with COVID, and especially those down in Melbourne, it's been up to here, and also homeschooling too, I might add. And then on the right hand side here, we've got our capacity. So that's things like your strength and your motor control, your mobility, your previous injury history, your running gait, all those sort of things. So it's always, again, when we've got our injured runner in front of us, we've got to work out, okay, what have we got on this side? What have we got on that side? How do we get some rocks off there, or how do we get more on this side to create some more balance? So we're going to talk about some of the common history questions that you'll ask outside of the usual, where's your pain, what aggravates it, what relieves it, those sort of things. So firstly, we're going to talk about loading, and loading is a really important discussion that you need to be having with all your runners. From a practical standpoint, we mentioned before that the vast majority, 80%, upwards of 80% of injuries are overload injuries. And so therefore, really a good discussion on their training variables is vital. So the two mistakes that we tend to see in runners, and this is mainly recreational runners that you'll see this, sort of a high level runners are generally under a coach, and so they're generally doing this a little bit better. But your recreational runners are where you'll often see these mistakes, and that's certainly the large majority of running patients that I see. The two mistakes that we see there is, number one, doing too much too soon, and number two is doing too fast too often. So too much too soon, firstly. So on this graph here on the left-hand side, this is probably a common pattern that we see in recreational runners, is that they sort of, there's no real plan. They sort of, one week they might sort of think, oh, it's nice weather outside, I'm going to go and do 3 runs. And then it's, they might think, oh, life's busy, I can only get 1 run in this week. Next week, it's like, I'm really motivated, I'm going to catch up on last week. They might get 5 runs in. And you see this up and down seesawing pattern here, lots of load spikes and troughs down through here. And then we see an injury result down the track. On the right-hand side, this is what we like to see. So a gradual increase in progression, maybe with the occasional, a 4th or 5th week there is a bit of a down week to recover, but it's just a gradual, steady incline upwards. So one of the, and you've probably all heard of the 10% rule, and the 10% rule is there is some evidence to support this. Now, Rasmus Nielsen did some work, and they looked at the increasing training volume and the risk of injury. And what they found is, this was in recreational runners, but they found that increasing training mileage between 10 and 30% was generally pretty safe, and didn't significantly increase their risk of injury. But what you can do is, and one of the problems with, if you're just using a blanket 10% rule for everyone, the people at the lower ends of mileage, so that those that aren't doing a lot of running, so they might be doing a couple of 2K runs a week, if you're going to increase them by 10%, it takes a very long time to get anywhere, really. So if they're doing 4K and you're only increasing 10%, that then go from 4 to 4.4, and then 4.8, and so it takes a very long time to build them out. So in those lower mileage ranges, you can actually increase them by a little bit more, and anywhere upwards to 30%. Now, we say up to 30% because if you've got a particular runner in front of you that's had multiple injuries, they've got a lot of stress, they've got poor strength, we're talking about this imbalance on the scales there. So if they've got a lot of on this stress side and not a lot on the capacity side, well, you may not increase by 30%. You may actually do that by little smaller increments there, to make sure that they don't re-aggravate their issue or cause something new. But as we start to come up through the different mileage brackets here, then we do want to increase by a little bit less, because as we start to get greater, and as we start to get towards 100 Ks, 10% of that is 10 Ks. But if we were going to do 30% of that would be a 30K increase, and that's pretty significant. So that's why we generally in this upper bracket, and you don't get too many recreational runners that are running that high. And then once you start to tip over 100K a week, then that's when you want to sort of cap it at about 10 Ks there. So a good little handy rule there, and adapted that one from Tom Goom, who also does a lot of great stuff with running too. So for those that aren't aware of Tom, certainly I'd advise giving him a follow as well. So 10% rule there. The next loading mistake that we see in runners is that they go too fast too often, and hard running is hard on the body. Now, a lot of people think, and recreational runners are classic for this. They think that every run that they've got to do, it's got to be hard. I've got to sweat. I've got to get home. I've got to feel like I'm going to vomit. It's going to be, I've got to really get a good workout through here. And one of the problems with that is that the faster you run and the harder effort you're doing, the more taxing it is on your body, the more longer it's going to take to recover as well. So we want to sort of, with a lot of our recreational runners, we need to get them to slow down. So what we want to see in terms of intensity distribution of our mileage is we want to see an 80-20% balance there. So that's 80% of your weekly training for a runner, we want to be doing it at a nice low intensity, and the remaining can be at a higher intensity. Now, Stephen Seiler is an American researcher, and he's done a lot of good research into this. I was lucky enough a few months ago to see him on a webinar. This is one of the good things about COVID. He was initially going to be presenting live for Brad Beer up in Queensland, but he presented a webinar. So it was really good I'd been sort of following Stephen's work for a while. So it was good to hear him and sort of summarize all the things that he'd found. But basically what Stephen had done is he's dedicated a lot of his academic life into looking at the training habits of endurance athletes, both elite and recreational. But what he's sort of found is that right across a lot of endurance sports, so that's things like cycling, running, triathlon, and over in Europe as well with cross-country skiing, he found that their vast majority, so 80% of their weekly training volume is done at this nice low intensity. And again, it can be hard to, when you're dealing with recreational runners, it can sometimes be hard for them to accept that doing this training at a low intensity is actually going to get them faster. And I've certainly had some discussions, and you meet some resistance to that sometimes. But you can present them with the research there as to what Stephen has done, and he also interestingly looked at different ratios there, so that they've sort of compared 70-30 and 60-40, and found that the 80-20 was superior in terms of for fitness gains. And this type of approach, this 80-20 approach, is also called polarized training, because it's called polarized because you're training at the polar opposites. So you're sort of training high, training low through here. And what a lot of recreational runners will do is they'll train in this middle zone here, in this gray zone, where it's, they're training fairly hard. But the problem with doing that is that you're not getting the benefits of the low intensity stuff. So a lot of your aerobic benefits, and then they're not getting the benefits of the high intensity either. They're sort of in the middle there. So not only are they missing out on these, the most optimal benefits from either end, but they're also putting their body under a greater load. So essentially it's by training that way, it's an increased risk and a decreased benefit. So once you sort of explain to runners that, and they're sort of like, okay, I understand. And then you sort of, what will then happen is that, you're switching their program around a little bit and getting them running at this low intensity running. And they're often quite amazed at how much fitter they actually get by doing that. And the good thing is that this 80-20 rule now is getting out there a bit more. So a lot of recreational runners have heard of this. So it's not such a surprise for them when you're sort of saying, look, you need to slow down on a lot of your runs. But remember, that 20% of the time they can still run hard. So you can give them, one run a week where you say, now this is when you go, this is when you push hard. So. And what is an easy pace? So an easy pace or low intensity running is a good example is breathing through the nose. So just getting them to close the mouth if they're able to, breathing through the nose. Or the other one is a conversation pace. So if someone's right next to you, you're able to have a conversation as you're running along and not huffing and puffing. Now, how to take a workload history, and this is an important one for those of you that aren't on Strava or not aware of Strava. Basically, Strava is it's like a social media for runners and cyclists and triathletes. Strava is it's a free app. There's certainly premium features for it now. But if you haven't been on Strava and you do deal with runners, I recommend signing up for it, and just so you can explore and see what it's all about. But a couple of things you can do with the runner in front of you. Number one, if you can ask for their Strava account number, their ID, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And if they've got their profile set to public, then you'll be able to see all their runs. Some people might have it private, so that might not work. The other ones you've also got the Garmin account, and then you've got things like Training Peaks is also another common one where they'll store their runs. But most recreational runners will be on purely on Strava, and so you can have a bit of a browse through their training there. The other way that what you can do is you can, and I have done this in the past, actually up until just recently, is I'd send them, the runner, a spreadsheet, and it's just basically just a calendar, and then it has on there, you know, the distance, the time, their effort, and then they can put some notes about the session there. And I'll send that to them, and I'll say, I want you to put in here, you know, the last 4 weeks, or usually if they've had an injury, I try and sort of get 4 weeks before the injury, because sometimes what you can see is a loading spike might have occurred, and then a couple of weeks later you'll see the injury present to you. So so try and sort of get that backdate that a little bit there, so you can get to them, send that to them. That's their homework. Okay, they need to get that back to you if you can't access to in Strava. If they will give you Strava access, or you're able to see that, then you can put that in yourself. Now, what I'd recommend is if you're not used to doing this, and this is fairly new to you, then the advantage of sending something to them, or you doing it out of hours, is there's no pressure on you to sort of make any immediate comments on it. Because when you're first looking at it, you know, stuff's going to be like, it just looks like a lot of numbers to me. I don't really know what I'm looking for here. So by doing it outside of the consult room, sort of gives you time to sort of look at, you know, analyze the numbers and look and see, you know, where some of those peaks and troughs may have been, where they may have gone wrong. Then you can come back in your next consult and you can sort of say to them, look, I've had a look at your training, and I see how these ups and downs, and you had a week here where you didn't do much, and you can have a discussion on that. And that's really important that you do this, because if this has contributed to their injury, then educating the runner about avoiding this in future is really important, because that goes a long way to avoid sustaining another one down the track. So the other thing which we'll touch on is that not all the miles are created equal, and this is a recent paper that was produced by Max Paquette and a few others. And the issue with sometimes with just looking at kilometers is it doesn't really tell you how hard they've done them. So for instance, if you've done a 10K easy, well, that's very different on your body than a 10K hard. And sometimes by just looking at the mileage there can underestimate the stress. So one of the things that is recommended is to using a scale called RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. So that's a scale of 0 to 10. 0 is really nothing. 1's a walk, and sort of 2 to 3 is like an easy run, and 10 is a flat out race effort, really, really hard. And what they can actually do is rate that run, and then what you then do is you multiply that RPE. So say I did an easy run today, it was a 3 out of 10. I ran for 50 minutes. So what you can do is you can multiply 3 by 50, and that then gives you the training load for that session, which is 150 units. So just be aware of this, and this is why I was talking about before. If you're going to set up a spreadsheet, have the 3 columns of the distance, the duration, and then that RPE, and then you can just set a little formula up there as well that will give you the training units. So as I said, making sure that you're taking the RPE into consideration. So if we have a little peek here at, and this is my Strava profile here, so you can sort of see when you ask them to send that to you, you can see the number there, and that's the number that you want, so that they can send you that URL, and then you punch that in, and if they've got that set to public, then you can get in and have a look and check out their mileage. Now, Strava have just actually made some changes to their premium, their paid and free versions. And I've got a feeling that you now, as a non-paid person, I don't think you can actually see these, but I've yet to check that. I only thought of this last night, actually, when I was presenting last night. I'm a paid member, so I can sort of see, others' history, but just that there might be a potential little hurdle there. But if that's the case, well, then just flick them that spreadsheet and get them to fill that in. But sort of we have a look at, this is sort of my training history for the last year. So, this is sort of what we want to see. So sort of gradually building some easier weeks, sort of some ups and downs there, but generally not too many going up and down here. We can see around this time there was a bit of a dip down, and that was actually, I smashed my knee on this table right here actually. And so that was a bit sore for a little while. So I had to have an easy week. Actually, it was at the end of that week, I think I had to have an easy week there, and then pop back up and was able to keep going. So, looking at these bars, we want to see that pattern of that graph that we saw before, just some nice steady ups and not too many peaks and troughs there. You can sort of see late last year there were a few of those, and a little bit of inconsistency there. I think there might have been a race around that week there, and then it was a bit inconsistent. But you can see through me, I've been fairly consistent since sort of April, May there. So that's what Strava looks like for those that haven't used it before. The other app, and I mentioned before that I was using a spreadsheet before, but now I've switched to using actually this platform called PowerLab, and this was after discussion with one of their developers over in the States. And this is pretty cool because what it allows you to do is it allows you to you add your runners in there. They basically just link up their Garmin data, or Garmin, Sunto, or Polar are the three supported devices on this there. So you link that up there, and what that does is it actually allows you to see. It's really good because you can sort of see everything all in the one place. It's I've also used this. I'm also using this now to prescribe running loads as well. So I'd highly recommend checking these guys out. PowerLab, they've got a free trial, so you can give that a go, have a bit of a play around with it yourself. And I think with the free trial, you might be able to sort of add some runners to that anyway. But shoot them an email. Jeff at PowerLab is really good, and he'd be more than happy to hear from anyone that wants to have a look at this program. But again, this is sort of what it looks like here. So this is me again, and so this is looking at the different days, so you can sort of compare the previous year, and it does all sorts of other different. They're looking at different types of data in this as well too. So worth checking that out at PowerLab. And if we go on to what we spoke about before, and the slides that we put up before about that inappropriate, we want to avoid these weekly ups and downs. So we can sort of see here, this is looking at days. So that's days there, and so it's okay to be seeing some of these rest days. And then here we want to see this. This is looking at total weekly volume. So we want to see that gradual increase going up there. Now the other thing that we tend to see is that we tend to see certain injuries be associated with certain running characteristics. And this is research that was done again by Rasmus Nielsen. And what we tend to find is that those injuries that are more associated with running volume tend to be your conditions around the knee, actually. So your ITB, your patellofemoral pain, and your patellar tendinopathy, where those injuries that tend to be associated with pace tend to be more the lower calf and into the foot. So your calf strains, your Achilles tendinopathies, and your plantar fasciopathy. Now, why does that matter, you might ask? Well, because if you've got a runner in front of you with one of these injuries, and say, for instance, you've got a runner with patellofemoral pain, you know that running volume is a contributor there. And so what you might sort of say is, instead of trying to build up the running volume too much, you might actually get them doing a bit more speed. And again, trying to keep it within that 80-20, but you can sort of push that a little bit there. But you might not build their volume too much. Conversely, on the other side of it, if we had someone with an Achilles tendinopathy, we know that running pace is more likely to flare those up. And so what we might do is we might sort of say, well, okay, we're going to keep the pace nice and easy, but we're just going to give you build some volume into that. So this is also useful to look at. You get a closer examination of their training history and seeing what sort of paces they've been doing, and then when you're prescribing the training load to get these guys back on track as well. The other thing we want to mention, and we mentioned before as well, is the previous injury history. So really important. So asking about, what injuries have you had in the last few years, any significant injuries there. So it's not uncommon to sort of find, a pattern of injuries appearing where they've may have sprained an ankle on that side, and then they've had an Achilles issue, and now they've got a patellofemoral pain. So all these sort of things that are going on, and if they haven't been properly rehabilitated, there may be some persistent deficits there that need to be addressed. And the other thing to ask about is what they do in their 23 other hours of the day. So, the 1 hour that they might be training, but what's the rest of their day like? What are they doing for an occupation? Are they sitting down all day? And if so, is that contributing to their hamstring tendinopathy, which we know doesn't like a lot of sitting, or their patellofemoral pain, which again doesn't like a lot of sitting there as well. So we sometimes find that whilst these people can be fit, and you often see this, is you've got what we call the fit and inactive individual, where they're training. They might be training a lot. They might be doing an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, but then during the day they may have 10 to 12 hours of uninterrupted sitting. So that's really important to discuss with them and say, run me through your typical day, your Monday to Friday. Tell me what you do, because there may be some lifestyle factors that you need to change and address there as part of their rehabilitation. And then talking about before, on our scales there and our balance, we want to be looking at the difference between stress and recovery, and that's and again going back to the stress and capacity there. Yeah. Okay. All right. There we go. All right. Sorry, we've got one more interruption here, guys. Yes. Okay. You ready?
I have Play-Doh and a fairy.
Okay. Thanks, buddy. All right. You heard that, everyone? Play-Doh and a fairy. All right. The other thing we want to ask about is sleep. Sleep is a really important one, and sleep is something that I'll ask all our new patients, actually. So whether they're a runner or not, one of the questions on the intake form is, how many hours of sleep do you get a night? And this is some of this is actually the data from these replies. So we can sort of see most people getting 7 to 8 hours sleep, so 42%. But I cringe whenever I see a 5 or 6 or less than 5 hours. I'm like, okay, I'm circling that, and that's certainly a discussion that we'll then have with the patient about their sleep habits and what's going on.
That's part of the elite sleeper group.
What's that? Sorry, yeah, that's right. Donald Trump. Was it Donald Trump? It's
they sleep faster than everybody else.
Yeah, well, we know though that poor sleep can actually contribute to injury risk, increased risk of illness. So maybe if he was sleeping 7 or 8 hours, he wouldn't have got COVID. Who knows? Yeah,
well, you can tell Arnold Schwarzenegger about that too.
That's right. And there's also been some. There's an increased body of evidence now with poor sleep and dementia late in life. Yeah, so there you go. And I'm trying to think, his name has just escaped me actually. And I'm sure one of the viewers out there, he's written a couple of books on sleep, and I've heard a couple of his podcasts. It's bad I've just forgotten his name, but he is an absolute goldmine of information for sleep. It'll come to me. But yeah, he talks a lot about this relationship, and essentially, sleep is when we're essentially clearing out the junk in our brain, and so things like tau protein and that sort of stuff can build up and potentially cause some plaques and cause some issue there. So a bit of a sidetrack there, but yeah, sleep is one you certainly want to be discussing. And harder when they're training and when your athletes are going through a harder training block, they need to be sleeping more. Sleep is one of the best recovery tools that we've got in our arsenal, and it's free. So a lot of people are trying to look at the little 1%ers of, I need to have an ice bath, I need to be, compression garments and all this sort of supplements, all this sort of stuff. But then you ask them about their sleep, and they're having 5 to 6 hours sleep. So it's like, well, why don't you go for the big fish here? And then, then you can start to chase all this other stuff as well. So sleep, really important one to ask. And I would argue talking about that with every patient. Nutrition is also something that you may want to touch on. So it's certainly not an area of specialty to me, and if there's issues there, then I'll be sending onto a dietitian there. Some of the things that you want to consider for an injured runner is they may need to increase their intake of omega-3s and creatine and vitamin D. Gelatin or collagen is something that's gaining some popularity at the moment. I've started using that more regularly with collagen supplementation and soft tissue and tendon issues. Making sure that they have adequate caloric and protein intake. So this is for anyone that is injured. They sort of think, oh yeah, I need to cut down my food intake sometimes, and but you because the way that they think is, oh well, I'm burning less, so therefore I should be eating less. But in actual fact, it does take for our body to repair and regenerate. It does take that energy. So making sure that they're not scaling things back too much there. And talking about that imbalance of energy in, energy out is a term that I'm sure a number of our viewers have heard about before, and that's RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome. And basically, what this is an imbalance between what's going in and what's being burnt, essentially. And so, if they're not having adequate caloric intake, then there can be a raft of issues that can go wrong. And we can see on this diagram here on the right side the many things that can contribute to RED-S, and it can be a real vicious cycle that these athletes can get stuck into, because they may restrict their calories and then find out, and train hard. Then they realize that they're underperforming, so then they want to train harder, and it's just a continual cycle downhill. So in women, one of the big signs for this is a cessation of their menstrual cycle. Now obviously you won't have that in women that are on the contraceptive pill, but also asking your athletes, your female athletes, when was the last time you had a cycle? Have you got a regular cycle? Because that's really important to ask there. Male, obviously you can't asking those questions, but if you're suspecting there may be some issues there, simply asking about sex drive, it's a good indication of their testosterone levels there. And if they're finding that that's dropped right off, then there can be a sign of that RED-S being present in them. We also can see in runners, because it is a sport where weight can matter. Some get a bit too obsessed and tied up with that, and so you can see eating disorders in runners. And there's been some public, especially with what happened in the Nike Oregon project. There was some runners that have come out since that time and talk about the battles that they had during this time with eating disorders, because they were told to lose a few kilos. So just be aware that especially in your higher level runners, that may be that can be present. So psychosocial factors. So often, when you're dealing with really anyone that's injured or in pain, psychosocial factors can be associated with a suboptimal outcome in their rehab. Big one for runners is that running is often part of their identity. They say, I am a runner. My friends are runners. My social interaction is running. We all get together on a Saturday or a Sunday and we do our long run and we chat about these sort of things. So it's really important that when you realize that when you've got a runner who's injured, they're often missing out on a lot of this stuff, and that can really play at them. That can they can obviously be upset and stressed about that, and in its worst case, then it can leading to depression there as well. So as much as you can, you want to try and keep the runners part of that community, and just by simply acknowledging to the runner that's the case, sort of saying, look, I know you've got this on, you've got this race coming up, or you've got this group here. Let's figure out some ways where we can still have you involved, and if we can't have you running just at this stage, then let's figure out ways to do that. Maybe on those long runs, maybe you could ride your bike and you could cruise along next to them, having a good chat. So just figuring out ways to keep them involved. Much like you would for any other team athlete that's, especially those dealing with a long-term injury, things like ACL injuries, you've always got to consider, how to make them feel part of your team and not make them feel like they're just, there by themselves doing it all solo. Because running is essentially it's an individual sport, but a lot of us will tend to have those social interactions and life revolving around running. Also important to consider when you're talking to runners is asking them, you know, what do you think is going on? And this is also one of the questions that we'll ask on our intake form for everyone, really. All patients will sort of say, what do you think is happening here? And you'll get all sorts of answers. You'll get people thinking, I think something's worn away, I think something's ripped or torn, and that's really important to address with them. And you know, when you're explaining your diagnosis and also addressing what they think is going on, and acknowledging that that's what they think and they feel, but then steering them away from that and sort of saying, look, you know, fortunately nothing here is ripped or torn, and this is how we're going to do it. Because if you don't address that and they've got in their head that something's damaged, and you're sort of saying, no, we're going to keep running, we're going to keep doing this, we're going to give you some rehab exercise, they're like, well, why am I going to do that when something's ripped or torn? Isn't it just going to be, you know, isn't it going to be ripped again, or is it going to be wearing down? So very important to address those, you know, what they think is happening, and I guess steering them towards what actually is occurring there. And also, if you want to use a patient-reported outcomes measure, then the Tampa scale for kinesiophobia can be used for that. Now, this is a good study that was just recently brought out this year by Turner, and they interviewed a group of sufferers or people that have had Achilles tendinopathy for a long period of time, and these are some of the thoughts that they're going through their head. So this was an interview research, and they just asked them a lot of questions, but you know, I'm just scared that I might rupture it. It's a slow process. I don't feel like I've lost control. It's disappointing and frustrating, and I just don't bother trying anymore. And this is some of the things, especially with these chronic overload injuries, things like your Achilles tendinopathy, your patellofemoral pain. They've often had them for quite a long time, and some of them can be really at rock bottom. And so it's really up to you to give them the confidence and give them the support, and also make them see that the light at the end of the tunnel of how to get through this, but also acknowledging that it can be a slow process. I mean, things like tendinopathy and also patellofemoral pain can actually take a while. But if you can communicate to them and say from the start, okay, we've got Achilles tendinopathy now. This probably isn't going to go away for maybe 6 to 12 months. You may have some residual pain there. But what's really important is that you'll be running during that time. You'll be doing everything you want to be doing. You'll be, you know, setting PBs, doing all of that sort of stuff. But there will be some lingering pain. And then one day you'll just think, oh, it's not there anymore. So making them realize that some level of pain is safe and acceptable, and that it is likely to hang around for a while. But also highlight, but they will be able to do everything they want. Okay, so they'll be able to function. So there's, you know, the difference between suffering and being able to be resilient and carry on. Now, this is the big one. We mentioned this in the start there, but do not be this guy. Runners hate to hear these three words. Stop running. And this is unfortunately, if you do tell a runner that, they will usually go somewhere else, because as we mentioned, they love running. Running's a big part of their life. Now, there are certainly injuries where they may need to stop running, or they may need to reduce their running. But giving a blanket term, and I've seen this happen, and unfortunately, GPs are often the worst at this. They'll just tell them to stop running for an indefinite period. Who knows when they're going to resume? But it's really, you know, it's a horrible thing for them to hear. Now, really, we want to, with most running injuries, bar probably the bony stress fractures, but even some stress fractures can continue to be run through, the lower risk ones. But most injuries, they will be able to do some form of running. But whether it's, you know, it's reducing their volume, whether it's mixing up the speeds a little bit, most things they continue to do. So runners are often happy to hear, you know, once you've figured out what's going on, you can say to them, look, the good news is we're going to figure out ways to keep you running through this. And that instills a lot of confidence from them, and will make sure that they're not going to next door to get to seek the answer that they want. But look, if there really is something that they can't be running through, then you know, make sure you stick to your guns with that. Don't tell them to run if there is going to cause some a worsening of their condition. But just say to them, look, we're going to need a little bit of a rest, but we're going to get you back to running as soon as possible. Shoe wear. So what we look for with shoes is you can get them to bring all their running shoes in. So they'll usually have multiple pairs. You know, they might have 5 or 6 different pairs. So get them to bring their shoes in with them. You're looking for signs of wear on there. Also get them to bring in their shoes that, you know, may have been they might have outdone those, but bringing those in because they'll often show their wear pattern. What we want to see for normal wear is you do want to see some wear on that posterior lateral heel and also underneath the first toe there. So obviously as our foot lands on that posterior lateral heel, rolls through and comes off, that's where you're going to see most of those signs of wear. So you're looking for any asymmetries there. You can also slip your hand inside the shoe and also feel on the inner sole there where there's been some increased wear spots. So getting them to bring their shoes in. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about strength, and then we're going to wrap things up. But one of my favourite movies, Happy Gilmore, and one of the sayings in that movie was "It's all in the hips." There, Chubbs. But for runners, is it all in the hips? It's actually not. And for any of those that have followed me on social media, they know my obsession for the calf muscles. But the calves are really the powerhouse for running. And if we have a look at here, this is some research done by Dawn, and this is comparing a lot of the different muscle groups during running at different speeds. So we can sort of see here running at a slower speed of 4:46 minutes per k. We can sort of see here the glute max is 0.38 body weights of force that muscle is having to take. So it's not a lot. In fact, it's actually the least contributor at those lower running speeds. But if we have a look who's on top, it's the soleus down the bottom through here. So a real powerhouse there, doing almost close to seven times body weight. As we go up through our speeds here, so getting up to sprinting, we still see the soleus doing a considerable amount of work. The glute max does start to come into a little bit more, and we can see the psoas and the hamstring start to contribute more towards at those higher speeds. But the soleus is a big power group there, and you add the gastrocs into that as well, and they are arguably the most important muscles for runners. Now, if we have a look and ranking these at different speeds by the 1, 2, 3, so we see at these slower speeds, soleus, quads, and hamstring, 1, 2, 3 there. Psoas starting to come up a little bit here. Then as we get faster towards some pretty cracking speeds here into sprinting, we see the psoas and the hamstrings. So psoas does actually quite a lot. The hip flexors there and the hamstrings as well. So you really only tend to see with hamstring injuries in runners, you'll usually only see that when they're having a crack at sprinting. So it's usually the faster speeds that will put more load on that through there. And then if we have a look at that graphically through here, so here we see soleus up on top really at most speeds until that very fast speed there where the psoas and the hamstring take over. So our quads, as we saw 1, 2, 3 there, the quads are certainly, we don't want to neglect those as well. They contribute a lot when we initially hit the ground, and that providing some absorbing that initial braking force. But the soleus and the gastrocs there are what really propel us forward. So they're the ones that do the majority of work through there. So how do we assess the calves? So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. We can do a calf raise to fatigue test. We can perform a calf raise heel height, which is basically getting them to raise up on a single leg and measuring that height in centimeters there, comparing that from side to side. We can do a bent knee heel height, which is a similar one as this, but puts more emphasis on the lower soleus there. And then we've got our soleus calf raise endurance test. So that's basically, standing, bend the knees and see how long they can hold that position for on single leg. And then we're lucky enough to sort of access to force plates there as well. So we sort of test seated and standing calf raise strength. And that's the typical result. We want to see 1.5 to 2 times body weight on that. But if we have a look, and one test that you can take away from today, and you can even perform this and testing this on yourself, is a calf raise to fatigue test. So what we want to do with how we want to set this up here is we want to have up against a wall, just with the fingertips up against the wall there for a bit of balance. And then we're going to raise up on the tippy toes. Now, you as the clinician, you're going to have a ruler or a pen or something there, and we're going to make sure that what we're going to do is they're going to raise up on both feet. You're going to take with the ruler, you're going to get that highest point at which they've gone, then they're going to drop down. Then they're going to switch over to the first leg you want to test, and then they're going to raise up and down, up and down as many times as they can until they can't do anymore, until they fail. So until they can't touch that ruler. Now, a couple of things to watch with there is you want to keep the speed. So I use a metronome, so you can set that for 30 beats per minute. So they're just going up, down, there like that, because sometimes what you see is they want to just sort of get it out as quickly as possible. They want to go up and down. So we want to make sure that's nice and slow and controlled, and making sure that they're not compensating, not bending the knee and trying to sort of shoot up using their quads, and that they're also rolling off and pushing through the big toe there. So there's sort of the normals that we want to see for those. Really, we want to see, if you put a blanket number across there, I'd say 25 reps we want to see, and we don't want to see any greater than 10% difference from side to side. So even if they are able to get over that 25, if we're seeing a 25 on one side and 35 on the other, then there's some issues through there. The higher level runners, we generally like to see above sort of 35 and getting closer to 40, but your recreational runners, ideally around that 25. Now, that doesn't mean if they don't pass this, it doesn't mean that they can't run. It just means, all right, well, there's probably some work that needs to be done there. And going back to our increasing the mileage, we might not increase these guys as quickly because they don't have that capacity there. So that wraps it up. Snuck in a little bit on my favorite muscle group there, but more than happy to field any questions that anyone's got. They can find me on hit me up on the email there. We've written plenty of blogs on a lot of these topics that we've mentioned today, but also can follow on social media through those handles there. So over to you, Janie.
Thank you so much, Luke. There's absolutely no question after watching that why you are talking to us today about running and managing the injured runner. I know that you've got such a passion for it. It's really nice to watch you talk about it. And I took a plethora of notes through this whole thing. So I had a couple of questions. Obviously, anyone who's been watching, you can hear some questions in the comments. I'm watching those. But I guess just for myself, there's so much, and of course in true GrowthRx style, I'm tying a lot of it into leadership. And as you went through and discussing it, so much of what you talked about through the injured runner and managing them is just transferable to any patient. You talked about sleep, the nutrition, the communicating pain, offering empathy for the fact that when they can't run, and then those, psychosocial aspects to their injury and also trying to get back to it. So there's so much of that falls into leadership. And when you're guiding somebody in a treatment room through a particular treatment plan, we really are trying to create meaningful change in their injury and in their life to get them back to doing what they love. So of course, this ties back into leadership. I think my question is, when we're trying to put it and make it clinically applicable, for myself who doesn't specialize in running, but I absolutely see runners. Somebody is always going to come in, one of two different people, and I guess this is where I'm going to draw my question to. We're going to have Jenny. So Jenny comes in, Jenny's 50. She's a little bit overweight. She's put on the COVID kilos, and she's decided that to lose weight, she wants to run. And then we've got Johnny, who's an athlete, who's an avid runner. So my questions for both of them, I guess, to tie this into a clinical setting. I once heard a practitioner when I was in the clinical setting as an osteo student, and I heard a clinician say to Jenny, if you haven't run before the age of 50, you shouldn't start, and why would you start? So there's a lot of people out there who want to start running for so many different reasons, whether it be weight loss or fitness or just trying to get a little bit healthier. My question then is, obviously we've talked about managing the injured runner, somebody who already runs, but what about somebody who is fresh off the mark, who comes to you as a practitioner in any modality, osteo, chiro, physio, and says, I want to start running, where should I start? I would love to know that. I would love to know your advice on that.
Well, it's a really good question. You see plenty of those, and firstly, I'll congratulate them for wanting to go down that path. And I'll firstly say that that rule of after the age of 50 is rubbish. I've had many other patients that have done the same thing and done it quite successfully, and have gone on to be running marathons and above. So starting well after 50. So it's something that, you know, taking that runner, for instance, and you know, we'll go through and do a good examination and see, you know, testing some of their capacities, and again, looking at that balance and sort of saying, all right, well, you know, maybe Jenny doesn't have a lot of strength through here. She doesn't have a lot of fitness, you know, but you know, she's getting some good sleep, and she's got some good, you know, in terms of life stresses, that sort of thing. So maybe what we're going to do with her is, you know, we've got some objective numbers as well too with our examination. So we know that Jenny, for instance, you know, maybe can only do 10 calf raises. She might have some decreased strength and some lack of mobility in certain areas there as well. So what we're going to say to Jenny is, all right, Jenny, this is what we found. We've got this. This is where we'd ideally like to see you working up towards this, but that's okay. We can start you on the path to running now. We're going to give you these things here to be doing at home to work you up to it. And then we're going to now start you working into working towards running. And quite often with that, so, you know, a lot of things that I'll get people doing is just for a week or maybe week or two, getting them doing some brisk walking, and that could be every day. So it's, you know, they're really pushing the pace. They're not breaking into a run, but they're really pushing that quite hard. And that might be sort of just 20 minutes there. And then I like to sort of a return to running program that I'll use, and this might be a return, or it might be for those that have had a long time off running, or those that are starting into it for the first time. You give them 20 minutes after they've done a week or two of this brisk walking and they're getting through okay with that. Then you go for the 20 minutes, and you say, all right, what I'm going to get you to do is I'm going to get you to jog for a minute, and then I'm going to get you to walk for a minute. And then we're going to alternate that walk jogging program there. Then week 2, if they're getting through that okay and they're feeling, well, that was pretty easy, then we'll get them to do 2 minutes running, 2 minutes jogging, 1 minute walking, and just alternating that again between the 20 minutes. If they find that if Jenny's like, oh no, I'm feeling, you know, fitness is not quite there, I'm sort of struggling. All right, well, let's stick with let's go with the 1 minute. Then we'll keep going with that. And it's you know, you see some very rapid changes in people, and you know, they like anything, you know, when you're starting a strength program, you can see some very early quick changes, and that really buoys them, and they sort of say, oh geez, I'm feeling, this is feeling easier already, like even just after a week or two. So it's a matter of giving them a nice, steady, slow progression, and also giving them, you know, some things that they might need to work on in the process to ensure, I guess, lessen the risk of something going wrong.
Yeah, great advice. I think that's where most people would start, but obviously someone like yourself who deals with this sort of stuff all the time, you know, even though we're not specializing, we are equipped to sort of give those basic progressive loading advice and just manage somebody through the process. So on the flip side of that, then we've got Johnny, who's an athlete, and I'm sure that you get it all the time, because people, I'm sure, just come to you and they want to be fixed and they want to be better. What if you've got somebody on the opposite side who's just not listening to your advice and continues to run through? Do you have to take a hard line sometimes? And I know that you mentioned you don't want to say just stop running, but when somebody's just not listening, do you really then have to plan it out strategically a little bit more?
You do, and I think there's a couple of things that you can usually, you know, go in your favour there, is that runners tend to be, you know, they tend to be a type A personality. They're very driven, they're numbers driven, and so sometimes you can use that to your advantage if you can present the data to them that's sort of suggesting this isn't going so well, and often you can turn around to them, and you do have to be, you know, you have to be honest with them sometimes, and saying, look, you're here because you're injured. Things haven't been going right. Something needs to change. This is what we're proposing, and this is the plan. So it's really important though to outline a plan to them, and that's where you may sometimes need them to get them to stop, but there is a plan to resume. They can sort of see what the gradual progression is, what the criteria they need to achieve, and the step by step there to get back to doing what they want. And I've sort of found, I guess, over the years, a lot better with that, and a lot less resistance to what I'm proposing, because I incorporate a lot of those things. And not to say that it still doesn't happen where you get some pushback, but generally if you've got data on your side, and that they tend to be really responsive to that, so you can feed off that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where that objective data, and you do particularly, and that's one of the things I wanted to mention as well, on your social media, on Instagram and particularly LinkedIn, you're very, very active in content creation in this space, and so much free content. I mean, gosh, if you're not following Luke now and you're interested in this space, I highly suggest that you do. And you do a lot of objective stuff where you do before and after and tracking those sorts of things. And exactly as you said, that type A personality, they need and want to see improvement. They're perfectionists and they want to know that something's working. And if it is, they're incentivized and motivated to keep doing it more.
Yep.
So, tying into that perspective. So if you do want to look at much more of that stuff and just little snippets and drills and videos, go back through all of Luke's content, particularly, on both of those spaces. How else can people find you, Luke?
Yeah, so the best way, as we put up before, the socials is where they can find me. I'm obviously on LinkedIn as well. They can search for me there. But socials is where I tend to put Instagram, mainly putting a lot of stuff up on there, and then through our clinic website as well. So regularly putting up blogs, usually a couple of weeks of information through there as well. So they can feel free to subscribe to that. Always. Welcome to feedback as well, things that people would like to see or any input that anyone's got. So
yeah. Awesome. And hit us with some feedback as well. I am trying desperately to get Luke to do a micro course for us in GrowthRx, so hopefully that can get loaded up if I can twist his arm enough.
Yes, sure.
Also, I guess, outside of that, thank you so much, Luke. On the flip side of that, now you specialize in running. People get runners in and sometimes they don't feel like they're equipped. Am I wrong in suggesting that people can refer some of their runners into you? Do you work on that referral?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I do see a number of runners or other patients that have been sent from other clinicians, and that's something that often can co-manage with that clinician, or it's just after a second opinion, or maybe just some testing as well too, where we'll test them and then sort of say, send to the clinician, say, oh Jade, this is what we found. This is what they need to be working on. This is what their rehab is, and then either send them back to you. You can take over from there, and or they can check in intermittently with myself, and if they need some help with tweaking their training program. So that's absolutely something that we do, and I'm big on collaboration and working with other clinicians. I think we've all got our strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, absolutely, all more than welcome to help any way I can there.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I know that this is a huge space and there are a lot of people interested in this side, in running both and in cycling. Gosh, it's a huge market out there. There's a lot of money to be made in this space. And obviously with your passion, it's great for me to be able to introduce you to the GrowthRx community. And thank you so much for your time, Luke.
Thanks, Jodie. It's been a pleasure, and no, I've really enjoyed it, and hope everyone's got something out of it, and also big pat on the back and high five for everything that you're doing as well too. It's been awesome to see in the last couple of years this the launch of this, and one of the things that I love with the multidisciplinary and being involved in SMA all those years ago. One of the things that appealed to me there was just the different professions mixing, and that's you've got that going, and it's been great to meet some of these people and learn from them, all about continuing to learn. So yeah, congratulations to you on everything you're doing there, Janie.
Thank you very much, and thank you. This will be downloaded in the members area. Thanks to everyone who's listened after the fact, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. Thanks very much.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone. All right, see ya. Bye.